As I said at the start, this whole presentation is contingent, or not contingent, but is supported by the article. So if you haven't had a chance to read it, we'll be referring to it. And please go back and refer to it. By way of introduction, many of you know me. I'm Dr. Peter Horneffer. I'm the Executive Dean at the All-American Institute of Medical Sciences in Jamaica, which is an innovative capacity building medical school in that country. I also serve as Director of Medical Education for Lecturio, and I want to give special thanks to Lecturio for helping provide this forum. I've been focused in the area of medical education for almost 15 years is my predominant pursuit, and it fascinates me, the strategies and the evidence-based practices which we could be and should be applying, and love to learn more about that with you and share our findings. My clinical practice has been that as a cardiothoracic surgeon, and had practiced for almost 30 years before I refocused and concentrated in these educational modalities. So thank you very much for joining today. I want to say that I'm particularly fortunate to work closely with a very diverse and very talented team. Created a learning science team at Lecturio, which is comprised of physicians, instructional designers, and educational specialists and teachers, so that we bring many perspectives and the best approaches to teaching and learning. So this is our learning science team, and everything you hear in terms of our content is really a synthesis of everyone's efforts and inputs. So thank you to the team. Just to review, many of you have attended before, but the essence of these presentations and our approach is to actually look back at the science. This is what we do in medicine, isn't it? That we ground what we do in the practice of medicine on evidence, and in learning, that evidence exists in the field of cognitive science and now increasingly neuroscience. We know how people think. So we use that evidence to create effective and engaging presentations and learning experiences. And the hope is ultimately that we create durable learning. It's easy to learn something very briefly, but to create learning that sticks with our students or for ourselves is really the goal that we need to achieve. And we've discussed this before in our previous seminars, and is the recurring and enduring theme of this content. Today, we're going to focus on effective presentations, how to optimize the learning experience with evidence-based multimedia principles. So let's review our learning objectives, as is our standard practice, and the key takeaways, and not just from this presentation, but in conjunction with the article. We hope we can identify the cognitive foundations of multimedia principles, apply Maier's multimedia principles. And I'll tell you about Dr. Richard Maier in a minute. Apply graphic design and universal design principles, and apply these principles to your courses, so you know how you actually put this to work. So I'm going to start with a question. We always want to keep these sessions interactive. So what do you think makes a presentation particularly effective? And anybody want to just jump in? Remember, there's no, don't be shy. Just feel free to add student engagement makes it effective, active engagement, energy of the presenter. I hope I have enough energy, engaging, interaction, and engagement with the audience, and images that communicate. So storytelling, a lot of this is right. And a lot of what you're going to hear today is intuitive. Some may not be intuitive, but all of it's going to be evidence-based, and that's the recurring theme. If you don't take anything else away from this, I'd ask you to consider that when you make presentations or do any part of your teaching, what is the evidence that supports what you're doing? Just as as a heart surgeon, if I'm going to do heart surgery, I have to demonstrate, I have to know what the evidence is that allows me to recommend and hence perform an open heart operation. So let's take a closer look at all this. So what are effective presentations? They ought to be appealing, engaging, informative, concise, and that should lead to an ability to convey information and ideas memorably. Now, I want to point out something in particular here, that the real essence is to actually convey the information and the ideas memorably. There's sometimes a tendency to be entertaining, to be memorable. I'm sure you've watched a movie, you come away and, gee, that was fun, but what was it really about? You don't know. And remember, we have a job to do, and that job is to educate our students. They have a tremendous amount to learn. So yes, we need to be personal. We'll talk about the strategies or the principles behind effective learning, but being just memorable is not sufficient. It's the ideas and the information that have to be memorable. So why do effective presentations work? There are really three basic principles, and these you'll see that they will recur, that effective presentations have the ability to boost cognitive processes. We've talked a lot about that in the past, and we'll revisit that. They function irrespective of learning preferences. Remember, there's this predominant myth out there that we should accommodate learning preferences, but in fact, that does not lead to more effective learning. It may be more, pleasurable to the students, but that concept of desirable difficulties leading to effective learning, the data clearly shows that you don't want to accommodate a student's learning preferences. And lastly, that effective presentations work by augmenting understanding. So this is a schematic which we put together to try and demonstrate the process, how you start with quality content, the right kind of medium. Remember, you want to tailor your medium to your concept, not to your learner or your learner's preferences. And most importantly, use evidence-based principles. Always be able to say, I'm doing this because. And then you then follow what the neuroscience is, what the neural pathway is. You have to be cognizant of cognitive load, and we'll talk about that very shortly. And when you put an understanding of the pathways and a recognition of the importance of cognitive load, you get to effective learning. So let me start with really what I believe that I consider, and many do, the father figure, really the founder of multimedia learning, is Dr. Richard Mayer, a cognitive scientist, who really focused on the principles, and wanted to evaluate whether this new modality of multimedia was indeed more effective than text or simply, lectures without graphics. And he started out, this all began with really three basic principles. And you'll see that this has been a recurring theme. One was the dual channel principle. And this is really a neurophysiologic phenomenon that learners process verbal and pictorial information via two separate channels. So when we talk in a bit about cognitive load, you want to get that information into the brain. And for those of you that were fortunate to join me when I had Professor Oakley talk about the neuroscience of learning last fall, you'll remember the different channels and how the hippocampus, which stores memories on a transient basis, it really has a limited capacity. So if you use both channels, and I'll go into this in a minute, you create more effective learning. The active processing principle is really what we think of now commonly as active learning, that if you work with the material, it leads to deeper learning. And the limited capacity principle is this issue of cognitive capacity and overload. So let's look at this graphically. This is the dual coding aspect where you get words and pictures. And then you go into sensory memory where you can select words and images in separate pathways. That all goes into working memory. But again, we have two channels here that we're using, the verbal and the pictorial. And lastly, to get this into long-term memory is when you can integrate and actively work with the material. So this is a schematic of how these three principles will interact. Let's focus for a second on cognitive capacity, because this is very important from my perspective, is providing the right amount of material in the right context so that it can be absorbed. And there are really three components of this: essential processing, extraneous processing, and generative processing. And if you have read the article and you're familiar with the terms, these are essentially, in many ways, the same three concepts again. And so if we look at this as a schematic or pictorially, you're trying to fill your glass with information. And really what you want to do is maximize the essential processing, the information that gets in, and the generative processing, the way it would allow students to work with materials, create schemas, build scaffold on that information. And extraneous processing is a distraction. Now, it's interesting, some presenters think that having distractions like GIFs, and especially if you have noise, you know, and I'll tell you, I can't talk to you. I don't know really, you know, how to concentrate. I would say that all the principles that we discuss are indeed principles. They're not hard and fast rules. And I'll digress a little bit and share sort of a personal anecdote. Being a heart surgeon, you know, many surgeons like different kinds of music or no music in an operating room. And if I have anything, I like something in the quiet background. I met one of my surgical colleagues who plays acid rock while he's doing heart surgery. And I just don't get it, but it worked for him. He had to pick a special team to work with him. So in general, these principles, avoid, you know, follow them. They are evidence-based. They're not hard and fast rules. There are exceptions, but this is an example of how extraneous processing can be a distraction, much as people activating their mics inadvertently can be a distraction. So this is what I'd like to see, is minimum extraneous processing and maximize the essential and generative processing. So Dr. Richard Mayer has done an amazing study over the last, really, I believe it's close to 20 years now, where he has taken these key principles and studied in classroom settings exactly what attributes are effective and aren't. And he has these basically in three buckets: one that minimizes extraneous processing, how you manage essential processing, i.e. what's coming in, and how you foster generative processing. That's the interactive component. And I'm not going to run through all of these because, you know, then I would have failed at minimizing, you know, or containing the amount of processing that I'd like you to be doing in this presentation. But what I am going to do is run through some examples of using 9 of these principles, and it happened to be 9 that were studied in the context of medical education. If you're interested in more, this is Richard Mayer's latest authoritative textbook. It's only 450 pages if you want to peruse it. I actually sent copies to all of the production crew at Lecturio because that's their bailiwick. That's what they focus on in making effective presentations. But for those of us that do occasional presentations, I think this would be a very good reference for you. I'm not covering everything in this or even in our article, which tried to synthesize the key points. So let's go ahead and look at some examples, and we can get some generative processing involved as well. So in this, what do you think is the more effective option? I think we have a poll here. Yeah, it's launched. So bang, my goodness. Well, we had almost 100% in example A. So go ahead, just give your best answer and we'll go through it. Everybody see the poll? And in the interest of time, we're slowing down. Come on, let's get at least 50%. Everybody, please participate. And suggest the right answer. Again, if you're always willing to have other opinions. Let's get, all right, we're over 50%. So I'm going to end the poll and share the results. So 82% said A, and 18% said B. So let's look at this example, and I'm going to call the example B Professor B's slide. And it really does contain a lot of extra text. He has extra facts without particularly indicating what's important, and his labels are separated from the diagram. So let's ask another question. How do you think Professor B can improve his slides? I think we have another poll there. So can everybody weigh in? What would be the improvements? And I know that there may be more. Just take your single best answer. Let's see. We have over 100. So let's end the poll. Share the results. And indeed, the majority of you got the right answer. So you know it, or you've read the article. Use only essential material. Keep this at the basics. Don't overwhelm. Remember that cognitive load or limitations of cognitive load are a real phenomenon. I still remember the indelible visual that Barbara Oakley shared in her talk of the octopus with 4 hands. How many pieces of information you can hold and process. So even though you know it and they will need to know it, you can't tell them everything all at once. So, and there are principles. So these really focus on 3 of the principles: the coherence principle, eliminating extraneous material, signaling, featuring essential material, and the contiguity to place words near corresponding elements of the picture. So let's go to example number 2. So this is a sample slide from a presentation, and you take a look at that, and let's go. Oops. So how do you think Professor B can improve his slide? We have another poll. You get folks answering that. And you guys are getting great at answering quickly. And we're over 50%. So let's end the poll and share the results. And indeed, break the lesson into user control segments is correct. And this is very helpful, as you can see. And granted, it's an extreme example, but you know, to start out with scroll to the bottom of the page for keywords and definitions, really, you ought to do that first. So the idea is to create a slide, and in the slide on the left, these 2, 1, 2, 2, 2, 3 would each be clickable elements that they would then get information, and they would have a spoken module overview. So in many ways, you know, there's some that describe read the slide, not completely incorrect, but the key element here is to break it into user control elements. And the principles, this comes from principles of managing essential processing. The pre-training principle, provide pre-training, named characteristics, key concepts. That's really the fundamental premise of the flipped classroom, isn't it? And how you provide information ahead of time. The segmenting principle, break it into learner-controlled segments, and that's what's so powerful about audiovisual material, is when things can be controlled. And the modality principle, present words in spoken form. So let's go to one more example, and you're giving a presentation, and you just, you know, present the patient facts. And this is very familiar to many of us, but really doesn't convey a lot, gives you not much context, but gives you some vital signs. So how might you think Professor B could improve this slide? Let's launch poll number 3. We have a bit over 100. Let's get over, we're getting close to over 50%, and there's a little bit more spread, but I'm gonna end the poll, share, and again, you all did great. Present pictures in words is really the key element here that we wanted to stress from Mayer's principles. And so if we look at the principle, the multimedia principle presents words and pictures rather than words alone. The personalization principle presents words in a conversational or polite fashion, and the voice principle uses a human voice rather than a machine voice. And when I first became familiar with Mayer's principles, this actually was a revelation to me, that because there's so much out there now in artificial language and machine voice, that it was intriguing to me that when studied carefully, students learn better, not only respond, but learn better with the familiar human voice. Now, I was actually saw a segment the other night where the ability to mimic a true human voice by a machine is going to be something that'll be with us soon. But given our present modalities, human voices are more effective. And that's just the evidence from cognitive science. So I've gone over in hopefully fairly rapid form, and not to cognitively overload you. You have the book as a reference, you have your article to examine Mayer's principles, and I think it's a wonderful guide to refer to. There are other principles from graphic design that were not promoted by Dr. Mayer that I think are important to understand and to address. So let me quickly review them with you as well. Basic design principles consider font size. You know, can you see it? Your presentations really ought to be seen by whoever is either at the back of the room, or in this day and age, you know, on a tablet, perhaps a cell phone, depending on what kind of modality you are, you think your presentations are going to be watched in. Align and limit font sizes. This really speaks to limiting extraneous processing, and use consistent color schemes. So these concepts are actually familiar with Mayer's principles. They overlap. And this is an example. On the left, you can see it's a nice, neat, clean. You're focused on aorta, superior vena cava, ventricle, the key elements of the heart, so important to me and many others. On the right, my eye, immediately wants to sort out what are these different fonts and styles, and I'm not even focused on what it's telling me yet. So these are basic graphic design principles. Universal design principles are related and somewhat similar concept, and they really speak to accessibility, that that we really want to help everybody in their modality be able to access the material. So it's best to offer media in multiple modes. Videos should have captions and transcripts, because in this busy world, sometimes you've got to turn the audio off. You want to watch the material, but it's easier just to read the captions and transcripts. And then likewise with photos and images, offer captions to help clarify what those pictures say. So, and then the third element is what's called the 5-5-5 rule, that we really want to try in any presentation, and this is a demonstration using 2 of our slides, how you want to use no more than 5 lines of text, no more than 5 words per line, and avoid more than 5 text-heavy slides in a row. And that's generally a guide. It's not absolute. Sometimes it's pretty hard to limit yourself to just 5 words with a concept, but keep this in mind. And remember, it's not because it's the information in your head that you want the students to know, and so you've got to put it down there, but you've got to understand that if you present it to them and they don't absorb it or retain it, you've wasted your time and theirs. So being effective is the key. In being interactive, we are not going to do breakout rooms, but what we thought would be helpful is to have a recap of sorts. So we're having a quick pop quiz. Again, none of this is graded. We don't know who answers what. So please just let's see what you retained. Let's see what you remember. And everybody's thinking a little harder here. I think those that read the article are going to be way ahead in knowing this, because they will have been reminded. I didn't I didn't dwell on any of the principles very much, so don't feel badly if you didn't read the article. And we have a little over 50%. So let's end the poll and share the results. And eliminating extraneous material is the right answer. You know, for the coherence principle, the other answers were principles, but not the coherence principle. And I don't get very hung up on the terminology, but I think it's important to know that there is this definition of these various principles from the cognitive science. So let's go to the next, how to maximize cognitive capacity. Reduce generative processing, reduce essential processing, or limit extraneous processing. This is perhaps more intuitive and easier to get from the talk. So let's, everybody's answering this far more avidly. I'll give it just another minute here. And share, and well done. Limit extraneous processing. 90% got it right, and so at least I conveyed that information well enough as a point that you recalled. So well done. Let's go to the third. So the 5-5-5 rule dictated having no more than 5 slides per presentation representing information using images only, or having no more than 5 lines of text per slide. So let's see. Let's get everybody, let's get up to 50% at least. Over 50%. Any last minute people want to take a stab at it? All right, up to 60. I'm going to end and share. And well done. Boy, it's great to finish on a positive note. Having no more than 5 lines of text per slide is one of the, you know, is part of the 5-5-5 rule. So very pleased that at least a part of this was effective in terms of its presentation. So in the article, the next session and part of what we like to present are practical implementations in the classroom. But I'm actually going to take the speaker's prerogative and deciding on purpose actually not to launch into practical implementations in the classroom in deference to Mayer's principles. I don't know about you, but my cognitive load is just about at capacity. Though you've been great and interactive, I'm looking forward to hearing from many of you and learning from you. So I'd like to use this as a teaser. Please go to the article and you'll see a whole list of practical implementations in the classroom that I could not put because I couldn't follow any of my principles if I were to do this here and now. So let's summarize. some of the key points and takeaways I'd like to emphasize is that effective presentations can and should facilitate students' learning, that students are better engaged through presentations that do follow multimedia principles. Evidence should be not only cited and understood, but applied. Students of different learning preferences benefit from a variety of media, and we've gone over this before. It is not necessarily effective to accommodate individual learning preferences, and that universal design, graphic design, these other elements of creating good presentations supports learning and increases educational outcomes. So I'd love to now learn from you all. We have a huge audience of very accomplished educators, and I'm going to ask my learning science team members maybe to help with some of these, and I'm going to address what I see in the chat. But if there are things that are missed, I'm going to have my learning science team members highlight some elements as well. So I have one. These are great concepts. However, the practical challenge is to cut down on content and teach threshold concepts in class so that the presentation has minimal text. Most faculty have trouble paring down content. That's absolutely true. I'm no exception. And this is really the same challenge. I know when I submit abstracts for meetings or even write articles, isn't it harder to write a 300-word abstract than a 1,500-word abstract? And we have to remember that cognitive load is important. I face this in terms of the school which I run, when I'm confronted with, well, I can't cover everything in class. Well, nobody can cover everything in class. And conversely, from the student standpoint, how am I supposed to know this? It wasn't taught to me in class, and I keep reiterating that they're there to learn, that the teaching is an adjunctive part of augmenting the process, but that most of their learning they will actively have to do. So a very good point about the content. It's not a matter of putting it all in front of the students. It's helping them learn the key points. So what should be the ideal duration of a PPT? A very good question from learning science. And we know that actually, and this is hard to achieve, but really after about 7, maybe 10 minutes max, concentration wanes. So if you're going to exceed that, as I did today, create interactive elements, break it up. Don't just go on and on without having back and forth. Put some polls in, put some questions in, and that allows you to have a longer duration of a attention span. So the 555 and to those asking questions, happy to answer. Please do refer. You should all have a link, and we can maybe we can put it in the chat for you again in the invite to the article. We have a collection of these articles that we're going to keep on the Lecturio website, and I'm very grateful to them, not only to provide the opportunity to share these thoughts with you, but also to aggregate these materials that you can refer to. So not more than 5 words per line, not more than 5 lines of text per slide, and not more than 5 text-heavy slides. Break it up, have some pictures, have some other elements, variety. Boy, there's some really tough ones here. How do we help faculty decide what threshold concepts are in their respective disciplines? That's why they're content experts, right? I think they need, that is their responsibility. So suggestions about putting text in the notes. I'm a big advocate for giving things, beforehand. We have some thanks, guidance and kinds of content to deliver synchronously versus asynchronously. And I think it's the most important thing is the presentation style, not, it's how you combine the two, and not whether you do one versus the other. Multimedia, and we're talking about slow learners versus fast learners and learning differences. And there's a whole science on learning differences that we hope to cover later on in this course, and that we will cover. I'm getting swamped with 35 new messages. So I am not, any other key elements that I teach synchronously include a short presentation, add a short quiz with the correct answers to break up. And I would ask also, please put in the chat, we'd like to start holding workshops so that we can get back to a smaller group. We can assistant to manage the chat and give you the best questions, right? And my learning science team, please hop in if you want to add any key questions that I have missed.
Hi, Dr. Horneffer. So you have in your chat a message from me. We have collected all the questions in the Google Docs. You can check that if you've missed anything.
I think I've just gotten out of, it opened in the wrong window. So let me go back to present mode. It's going to have to open that, or do you want to? Anyway, or just go ahead and suggest. We have lots of new messages. We're cutting close to the end of the hour. So we'd love a workshop. And I'm going to, we're going to be launching a survey very shortly. So yeah, lots of votes for the workshop. So let me just summarize. I think the absolute most important point, if I could get you all to take away from this, is please base your teaching and your learning and your students' learning on evidence-based principles. There is evidence out there that should dictate what we do. And I like the faculty of my school to do what they want to do in their classrooms, but my requirement and request is that whatever they do, they can validate it based on evidence, that there's a reason why they're doing what they're doing, not because it was always done that way for them, but that they know the evidence behind it, and realizing that there is leeway in that. But please always think, what is the evidence behind how you're teaching and how you're asking your students to learn? So let me go over some housekeeping things and follow-up. We're going to share the effective presentations handout along with our follow-up survey, which we encourage you to complete. And I'm going to be stronger than that. I implore you to please complete the survey. As I've said, I'm appreciative to have Lecturio provide this opportunity. We want to, we hope that it is liked and appreciated. And then also we're interested in evolving it and entertaining new ideas. The learning science team exists, and my focus in my involvement in Lecturio is to find the best ways to help teachers teach and help students learn. So there's really nothing along those lines we won't do. We will offer certificates of attendance, and there are faculty at my school, and many of you may appreciate this opportunity to have these certificates as continuing education units. We're also looking at creating, real professional development and possibly CME or continuing medical education units for these exercises. And then we will send you a summary document of key strategies, including implementation tips and key points. So please look for those, and those will be actionable. I'm also going to, if anybody missed, we're launching a monthly, or have launched a monthly informative newsletter that will parallel this durable learning series, and again be highly practical things that you can read in just a few minutes, have a worksheet, and use in your classrooms. So look for those newsletters as well. Our next event is, we've covered much of cognitive science, and this was the cognitive science pertaining to multimedia and presentations. We're now looking more into the realm of instructional design, which we covered as an overview in our last seminar, but we're going to focus in particular on learning objectives and assessments, and look at the evidence-based recommendations to optimize efficacy. I also want to make a plug to please join us if you're interested in pedagogical research. We have, we're expanding our effort to help coordinate and facilitate institution-based and single institution or multi-institution educational research, because we think this is an ongoing, evolving science. I'm learning every day in the classrooms in my school, and I'm sure you all are also. As technology evolves, we're just figuring out how to use it most effectively. So please mention those kinds of things in the survey. Tell us, how, if you find these sessions useful, and appreciate any other comments. So we've often had at the end of these sessions, many interested participants want to know, how to practically apply this in a platform such as Lecturio. And as Lecturio is kind enough to host this, I'm going to turn this